Okay, welcome to the module on two blank text completions. In this video, we're going to learn about the basic strategies. These strategies are very important, but what's just as important are those strategies we learned for one blank text completions. Well, why? Because they apply. They apply in many cases to the way that we are going to tackle two blank text completions. So very first thing is to read the entire sentence, starting here with Trent. Trent was able to combine blank with blank in a heated debate. He would always tactfully hear his opponent's side before exposing the logical flaws of that position. So we want to identify what sort of question this is. Going back to one blank text completions, this is a type of text completions where you're defining what these blanks are. And so therefore we have to know what comes after the blank. So we know because we have read the entire sentence. We've identified now the sentence type. It's simply defining these two blanks. There's no shift going on. And what did we do with one blank text completions? We looked for the keywords, for the clues in heated debate. Well, this person would always tactfully hear his opponent's side. So a good thing to remember is to try to deal with one blank at a time. It's a very good strategy because if you try to put too much on your plate, find the clues for both of these, try to come up with your word for both blanks, it's going to be a lot more difficult than doing one blank at a time. So Trent was able to combine blank. Well, he tactfully listened to his opponent's side. To be tactful is to be sensitive in a social setting. And so what word here means? I am going to be sensitive to you and polite. Well, hesitation, no. Hostility, definitely not. If one exercises civility, on the other hand, that person is being kind in social context. They're being tactful, and there's our answer for the first blank. Now, you will notice that the two blank text completion is different. Why? Because there are three answer choices versus 5. And three answer choices for the second blank are different from those for the first blank. So we have gotten the word civility for the first blank, and now we can move on to the second blank. Well, we now know from reading this entire sentence from the beginning that there's more to come, and that more will refer to the second blank. It says, before exposing the logical flaws of that position. So that's great. This guy Trent was a very good debater. He would listen to the other side, but then show how the other side was wrong. So what did he have here? Well, he combined politeness, civility with an ability to reason and argue. And so that's going to be my word, the word that I can come up with here and match to the answer choice. Again, you don't need to come up with an exact word, but a phrase. And so this person's good at debating, so they have intelligence, sure. Sarcasm, no, that's very negative. It doesn't go with the tone of the sentence. And definitely cowardice doesn't work. He's good at debating, and so he's able to combine civility with intelligence. Now, the final thing here to note, these are the two answers, but in order to receive full credit, you have to answer both of these correctly. You can't answer civility and then sarcasm and hope for half a point. Okay, we're going to try another two blank text completion. And in this case, well, let's do what we did last time. We started off with reading the entire sentence. In stark contrast to his later blank, Madison mostly blanked merriment during his college years, despite the fact that his school had a reputation for revelry. So we want to do what? We want to identify the sentence type. We want to look for shifters in stark contrast. So we know that this first blank now is opposite to this second blank. So in stark contrast to his later fun guyness, again, I'm making up my own words here, Madison mostly avoided merriment. Or in stark contrast to his later crazy guyness, Madison mostly, or actually crazy guy and fun guy is the same thing, so I take that back. In stark contrast to his not such a fun guy, Madison mostly invited merriment. So the point is these two blanks are opposite. That's great. We know the relationship between these two blanks, but how do you know which one is which? That is this the fun guy one, or is he having fun during his college years? And that's when we always have to remember what the rest of the sentence says. So despite the fact that his school had a reputation for revelry. So now you can see that there's another contrast going on here. So it's sort of a double contrast when you identify the sentence type. And you'll see that there is more complexity in two blank text completions simply because there's typically more words and there are two blanks. Once we get to three blank text completions, it's even going to be more complex. But here we have that double contrast going on. And we can start from the end here where it says, despite the fact his school had a reputation for revelry, for fun. So even though everyone was having fun at college, Madison avoided merriment. In stark contrast to his later fun guy, this partying guy, he mostly avoided merriment. So notice we're still dealing with one blank at a time. I was able to come up with the word for the second blank first. And again, we need a synonym for avoid. And it's definitely not took part in. Think of wallow. You wallow in your misery. You wallow in your grief. You get deeply involved in something. So that doesn't really work because we're going for the opposite. You're avoiding it altogether. And that's what the word abstain means. And now, again, we can come up or we can deal with the first blank. The importance here being you do not need to deal with the first blank always first. So again, we've more or less come up here with look for our keywords, and we've come up with our own words, and now we're matching. So in stark contrast to his later, so we need a word that means he's having a fun time. He's the party guy. What word is that? So a lot of people would be drawn to this, and that's something we'll have to realize too with two blank text completions. Sometimes a word can kind of work, and that's very similar to the one blank text completion. Kind of work doesn't really count. If somebody is amiable, they are friendly, does that mean they are partying? No, not by definition. They may party, they may not party. Conservatism obviously is the opposite of what we're going for here, and therefore the word carousing must mean to party, which it does. If one is carousing, they're having a great time, engaging in merriment and revelry, and there are our two answers in this case. So again, two blanks are a little bit more complicated. Make sure you read the entire sentence, identify the sentence type the way you learned with one blank text completion, and of course follow the same basic strategies, and that should always help you get to the answer. In this lesson video, we will be dealing with the double blank as it pertains to multiple sentences. So many strategies you've used so far for the single blank sentence would actually pertain to a double blank as long as that double blank is just one sentence. But things get a little bit different when you have to deal with multiple sentences, such as 2, 3, or even 4 sentences, which sometimes show up on the double blank questions. So what's the strategy we want to use for these question types? Well, first off, you want to make sure that you read the entire paragraph first. Why? Well, there's a lot of information there, and the test writers know that they can use information to trick you, to divert you, to make you focus on what's not important. And what's actually important is maybe at the very end of the paragraph, even if it pertains to the very first blank. So you don't want to jump to conclusions, but you want to read the entire paragraph first. Figure out which blank is easiest to deal with, meaning it's easiest for you to come up with your own word for. And again, come up with your own word. Make sure you look at the entire paragraph. Don't just look at the words around the blank. That way you'll jump to conclusions. And of course, come up with this big picture. Again, big picture is important. What's not important are the words right around the blank sometimes, because if you focus just on those, you'll have a sort of tunnel vision of the entire question. So let's take an example here. Now, this example is not the only way you will see a double blank with multiple sentences arranged. Here I have 3 sentences. The blanks are kind of close together. Sometimes they'll be spread apart, or sometimes they'll come at the very end. But again, the point is you want to take in the entire paragraph and look for that big meaning, not just jump to conclusions. And whatever you do, don't just start plugging in answer choices, because that, of course, will bias your interpretation of the paragraph. So let's take a look at this. The scientist's work is based on blank. Yet when the media reports on a scientific breakthrough, it is apt to overlook the years in which a scientist had to blank numerous hypotheses to arrive at. Now I want to stop right around there. At this point, I think many test takers want to already start figuring out what goes in the first or second blank. And since there's not much context, what they'll do is they'll start plugging in these answer choices. And they'll try to create a meaning, something that kind of makes sense. But once you do that, you're putting your foot into a quicksand, something that kind of pulls you in, and that's very difficult to get out of, because it's very difficult to unthink what you thought, meaning that you're suddenly interpreting the paragraph in a certain way, and you've only read to about this point. So a good strategy, again, is to cover up the answer choices and read the entire thing. So let's continue where that arrow is. Arrive at a single theory able to withstand scientific scrutiny. In essence, the whole idea of a breakthrough presupposes a sudden moment of enlightenment, a falsehood. Aha, the idea of a breakthrough is a falsehood. That's important. You take those two ideas and you go to the first blank. Aha, the scientist's work is actually not based on this falsehood of a sudden breakthrough, sudden moment of enlightenment, but it's something that's the opposite of that, something that's based on incremental change. Slow growth would be a good word or words to come up with your own blank. And again, using information we learned from those one blank lessons, notice the shift there to show us that there's a contrast between the scientist's actual work and what the media reports, this falsehood. Now at this point, it's a lot easier for me to get answers to the second blank. Notice I didn't deal with the second, or rather the first blank first, because it was the first blank, but because it was easier to contrast with the clue that actually came at the very bottom of the text completion. Now, once I've done this, you can always make sure, are these ones right or are they wrong? But what I like to do is to not take yourself out of the moment so much and to actually try to solve both blanks based on your own words. And then if you want to be 100% confident, you can go through the other answer choices as well. So that's what we're going to do. So for the second blank, it is apt to overlook the years in which a scientist had to blank numerous hypotheses to arrive at a single theory. Well, the media tells a falsehood, therefore it is apt or likely to overlook the years in which the scientists had to work slowly and methodically. So we already have a meaning now. The scientists had to methodically work with numerous hypotheses. You don't have to come up with this wonderful, perfect word, but one that is close enough. So let's look at the answer choices. Carefully confirm, and E is systematically reject. You may be tempted by carefully confirm because that word carefully and methodically is perfect. But let's look at the second word here. Now, of course, we can test these answer choices because we've already done the thinking and we're not plugging them in from the get-go and letting them do the thinking for us. So carefully confirm. Would you confirm hypotheses to arrive at one that actually makes sense? No, you would deal with and entertain many of them, but you would go through them, test them out, disregard them, and sort of the last one left would be the one that leads to this moment of breakthrough, which is actually, again, based on all this hard, slow, methodical work. Therefore, you would not be confirming. That doesn't make sense to confirm these hypotheses to arrive at a single one. The single one is the one that wins out. Therefore, you would be systematically rejecting. So now we're able to get to the correct answer. As I promised, though, we will deal with these other answer choices. Closely safeguard. You're not protecting these hypotheses. You're testing them out and rejecting them and going with the one that actually can withstand scientific scrutiny. That single theory. So we can get rid of F. And then going back to the first blank, we know that a momentous revelation is consistent with the media story, and B is an example of something that just really isn't mentioned anywhere. That is a lucky coincidence, and we can get rid of it. Okay, now that was very specific towards the end there. And of course, every text completion is idiosyncratic. It's its own beast, its own thing. But there are these general strategies that will help you out. So therefore, when you face a multiple sentence, double blank text completion, unless you think the first blank is just very obvious, and sometimes it may be based on the context, make sure to read the entire paragraph to get a sense of that big picture. And once you get that, you'll notice that, hey, I'm basing that big picture based on these clues that come from various parts of the sentence, not just based on a word that's right next to the blank. And of course, once you figured out what these clues are, deal with the blank that is easiest to come up with your own word for. And that's the key. Come up with your own word, and of course, if necessary, cover up the answer choices so they don't do the thinking for you. In this video, we are going to deal with a more tricky kind of text completion. One where we have to figure out the relationship between the blanks. And we can't just dive in, underline the clue, and say, aha, this blank equals this, therefore the answer is ABC. Instead, we have to really figure out how do the two blanks go together. And to do so, we have to look at the sentence structure itself. So what is the sentence structure here? Let's start reading. To call Mack and Meyer's latest exhibit hackneyed would be blank. Yet, to assert that the artist is of a blank talent would be indulgent. So if we just focus on the first blank, we really can't determine too much. Well, to call this person's exhibit or his art unoriginal would be, well, it would be nice, not nice, justified, unkind, charitable. Any of those could work. And so we have to keep reading on in the sentence and figure out how to deconstruct the sentence based not on the word hackneyed necessarily, but the structure of the sentence. Speaking of structure, notice that word right there, yet. So we know there is a shift going on between the part that comes before the comma and the part here that comes after the comma. There's also this word that is important, indulgent. When you are indulgent, you are favorable. You're being overly favorable to someone. So maybe someone isn't really deserving of your praise, but you're going to praise them anyway. So you're indulgent. And so to assert that the artist is of a blank talent would be indulgent. And so here we want a positive word, something like great. To say that they are the next Picasso, well, that'd be going a little bit too far. Remember the yet, though. The yet allows us to see that, aha, the first part of the sentence must be the opposite of that. That means that if this blank here is a great talent, then the first part of the sentence must have a word that's the opposite to a great talent, which would be one who has a hackneyed talent, or at least one who creates hackneyed works is definitely not of a great talent. But then what of the first blank? What is it being opposed to? So notice here the structure. Exhibit hackneyed would be blank. To assert is of a blank talent would be indulgent. Notice the would be indulgent matches up with the would be blank. And therefore the word we want is something that is the opposite of indulgent. So you're being overly nice to someone, being not nice at all. And so we go here to the first blank and we see that, aha, that has got to be unkind. And then going to the second blank, we can see that a positive word here is definitely not ordinary. Limited is definitely not the answer, but singular, great, outstanding, remarkable. And there are our two answers. So again, if you come across a text completion, in this case a two blank text completion, and you read and you can't really figure out what goes in either blank, look at the structure of the sentence itself, because that's going to give you an idea about what goes in this blank and what is the relationship between these two blanks and, in this case, the other parts of the sentence. In this video, we are going to go over something that you often see in two blank text completions, and that is back-to-back blanks. As you see here, this blank is pretty close to this blank. The reason why these can be tricky is because sometimes the sentence starts out with the blanks and you have absolutely nothing to go on. And other times you speed through the sentence reading and you get to the blanks and you kind of forget to look for the clues, which of course would come at the beginning. So always read slowly, looking for those clues or keywords to help you figure out the blanks. You should also figure out what the relationship between the blanks are. So let's read the sentence. Methodical and focused, Bach had little tolerance for disruption. He did not like disruption. The more blank his life became, the more his ability to compose blanked. So we've identified the keyword, but now let's look at the relationship between the blanks. The more unpredictable his life became, the more his ability to compose diminished. Notice he had little tolerance for disruption. Or the more orderly his life became, the more his ability to compose improved. That's the gist of it. Now, we want to go here and look at the answer choices because we don't really know which one it is. For the first blank, we have fleeting, hectic, and celebrating. Fleeting just means short-lived, not around for a long time. We want something that talks to the keyword of disruption. So the more chaotic his life became, or the more orderly his life became. We can get rid of fleeting, and we can also get rid of celebrated, which really doesn't directly get at disruption or lack of disruption the way that hectic does. And so if the word is hectic for the first blank, the second blank is going to be the opposite of that. Thrived is positive, so we want something where his ability to compose was actually not thriving, but the opposite. Evolved is not the opposite of to thrive or to do well, but that leaves us with the word languish. If something languishes, it doesn't do well. It kind of tapers off and goes down or diminishes. And so therefore, these are our two answers. Now this is a pretty straightforward two blank text completion. The vocab isn't that difficult, and the relationship may be easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a more difficult one. More difficult two blank text completion. Now, you can see that the two blanks, the back-to-back blanks, are at the very beginning, here and here. So what we want to do is we want to read the entire sentence, or the entire paragraph rather, before jumping to conclusions. So let's look. Because there are a few things that blank a scientist more than being told that something is blank, so-called pundits should be more cautious in their pronouncements. It's at this point where it's really tempting to plug in these answer choices. In fact, our eyes are kind of reading and also being drawn downwards. And I always tell people just cover the answer choices because they are meant to trap you. So you could easily say, well, because there are a few things that startle a scientist being told something, or discourage, or whatever that word is, galvanize. Any of them can work. And the same goes for the second blank. I mean, something could be mysterious or impossible, and it kind of makes sense. It could be a few of these. It could be startle, it could be impossible, it could be mysterious. You start coming up with your own interpretation of the text completion. The key is do not look at the answer choices, read the entire thing. What does it say? It says the Wright brothers took to the sky at the very time when it was fashionable amongst experts to ridicule the likelihood of human flight. It was the experts who ended up looking foolish. So, people, that is the pundits, should be a little bit more careful in what they say. In the case of the Wright brothers, these pundits or these experts were saying, oh, you can't fly. But they're saying that this at the time the Wright brothers were actually able to fly. And so we go back to these first blanks, and therefore to scientists, there are few things that really motivate them than being told that something is what? Well, they're saying ridicule the likelihood of human flight. Being told something is impossible. You can't do it. Therefore, that doesn't startle them. Startle's kind of shocked. If you're suddenly walking across the road at night and their headlights come on, you freeze, you're startled. Oh, what's that? Has nothing to do with being motivated. Discouraged is the opposite of motivated, and that leaves us with this word galvanize. And that way we can get at both of the correct answers by looking for the pertinent keywords that, again, are oftentimes towards the bottom. Mysterious, of course, doesn't work. And serendipitous, which is a tough word, means something that you find when you're not necessarily looking for it. It's one of those words that comes up a lot with science, because scientists oftentimes are studying many things and all of a sudden they happen or discover something they weren't looking for in the first place. But it's not a word that actually fits in this blank here because it doesn't match up with this idea that the experts are telling someone that, hey, you can't do this. So again, the answers are galvanize and impossible. So to recap, make sure you read the entire sentence or the entire paragraph before leaping to conclusions about the two blanks. That is, if they are at the beginning. And if the two blanks are at the end, make sure you go back to the beginning part to see what the clues are. If you've just watched the multiple sentence text completion lesson for the double blanks, which I recommend you do, you'll have seen that I recommend never plugging in the own answer choices until you've really thought of your own words. However, there are certain double blank text completions where that's just not possible because they simply don't give you enough. Really, the only thing you can arrive at is the relationship between the blanks, which is a video that we've already had. Here, though, it's even more subtle because once you figure out that relationship, there are still multiple answer choices, and you really have to comb through the context and the clues to figure out what the right answer is. So as you can imagine, this is not a lesson for those who are not, I would say, around the 150 level or so. So if you're below that, it's a good idea to come back to this video once you've confidently broken through that. But if you haven't, then of course, look at the other double blank videos. For those of you who are going on to the advanced section on the GRE verbal, you will probably see at least one of the two blanks have something similar, if not almost exactly the same as to what I'm going to show you here in a second with the double blank question. So apply what you've learned from the relationship between the double blank videos. You may want to refresh your mind and go back to that. And the point, though, I'll give you a quick summary here, is that you just want to come up with a connection between the blanks. Are they the same, the two words that go in the blanks, or are they opposite in meaning? And once you've done that, usually you can arrive at the correct answer. But here, you're going to have to really start plugging in multiple answer choices to see which one works based on the context. And there's usually very little context, just enough for you to get the correct answer. Now, of course, this sounds all pretty vague. And so let me give you an actual question to show you what I'm talking about. So we have, for a writer who has made a career of indulging in blank, his latest work is so blank that Despite its numerous merits, many of his most ardent readers may feel themselves pining to go back and reread the author's earlier works. So what we can figure out from here is that we have these couple of clues. He has made a career of doing something, and his readers are pining to go back to the something. Therefore, we know that the first blank has to be positive because he made a career out of writing in a certain way, and readers really like this certain way. So we can say, aha, this is positive. His latest work is so blank that people don't want to read it, so we can say negative. You may also want to read here this despite its numerous merits. So it's not saying, oh, it's a terrible book. It's just saying that whatever these two words that go in the blank, these words are opposite. So let's start with the first blank. A, clever hyperbole. Positive, clever. Comical digressions. Comical, amusing digressions going off the topic, but in a fun, amusing way. Both positive words. But look at C, outright speculation. Probably not something that readers want to go back to. Now you can argue, oh, well, maybe outright speculation is what readers want. And possibly. But at this point you want to say, is there something here in the second blank? Now notice how I'm juxtaposing the words in the two blanks. Is there something here that contrasts with outright speculation? We have overbearing, focused, and steeped in conjecture. Steeped in conjecture means full of guessing and speculating. You can see that these two are the same, and that this indeed is a trap answer for those who don't see the connection between the two blanks, that this connection is one in which the blanks are opposite. So we can get rid of these two. And again, we can go back to that original. It has to be something positive. Clever hyperbole. Let's start there. Is there an opposite to clever hyperbole? Well, hyperbole is an exaggeration, a clever exaggeration. And we have the word overbearing, which means kind of bossy in a domineering fashion, and focused. Is focused the opposite of something that's hyperbolic? Now, if you say, I see, when you exaggerate something, you're not focused because it's very exaggerated. Maybe, but that's not the sort of direct opposite that GRE is looking for. It's a little bit of a stretch, and so we get rid of A. And therefore, the answer has to be B, comical digressions. Again, when you digress, you go off topic. When you're focused, you're on topic. Those are clean opposites, and therefore, those are our answers. So again, you're going to have to work through the answer choices, plugging them in, juxtaposing them in a way that's different from the usual strategy, which of course is to look for the clues and then come up with your own words. You can't quite do that here, and you can't just right off the bat get the right answers even once you've identify the relationship between the blanks. Again, you have to kind of play around with the answer choices. So get used to doing that. Feel comfortable. Don't think you're taking the easy way out because, again, we're looking for clues. We're still thinking about it before we go to the answer choices. And finally, this is something that you will see most likely on the very hard section, probably not on the medium section, and definitely not on the easiest of the verbal sections.
Today we're going to talk about advanced double blank text completion questions on the GRE. So let's look at what marks these, how you can know you're dealing with one of these questions. Advanced vocabulary? Sometimes, but not necessarily. What you're always going to see here is misdirection and distraction in the sentence itself. So let's look at what I mean by that. Well, one thing you want to be careful about is don't assume that a double blank will be easy just because the words seem easy. Sometimes a GRE will try to lull you into a false sense of security so you don't even recognize you're dealing with an advanced blank sentence because the words look easy. So don't do that. If the vocabulary words are hard, so you do have those hard words, which sometimes happen, focus on the meaning of the whole sentence. And related to that, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that hard vocabulary does not distract you. Focus on the words you understand. Focus on what you know, not what you don't know, because often your knowledge of vocabulary will get you through a sentence even if there are hard words in it. Okay, so in short, what do you want to look for to make sure you answer these correctly? Phrases or words that are superficially connected to wrong answers. So thematically similar words in the sentence and the answer choices that don't quite match the true intended meaning of the sentence. Beware of that. And you also want to avoid wrong answer choices that are similar to each other and almost fit. If you see three similar words for a blank, figure out which word is different and which word is the true fit. In other words, recognize answers that truly, clearly fit, and learn to recognize the answers that don't really fit, even when there's similarities. So let's look at how we can apply these principles we've discussed to an actual sample question. So pause the video, see if you can find the answers, and we'll talk about this. Welcome back. Okay, so something you might have noticed right away is this large opening portion of the sentence, which I'm setting aside in brackets right now. And the issue with this opening portion is that there's no clues right in here on how to answer the two blanks within it. So you have to look after the semicolon for a clue. And the first biggest clue that should jump out is that the last part of the sentence tells you what the government wants to do with the deer population. They want the population to go back down. So that should immediately tell you that you can know something about what they want to do to a ban on deer hunting. Because deer hunting causes the deer population to go down. So that's a good thing. That's what they want. So, reversing should jump out at you right away. This answer choice A for blank 2. Reversing should jump out at you because if there's a ban in place and you reverse it, there's no longer a ban. The hunters can come back in, they can shoot the deer, and the deer population goes down. Now, B, prolonging, well, that'd be the opposite. You don't want the ban to actually be longer. You don't want to prolong it. And adopting is also the opposite of what you want because that means starting a ban. So both of those are incorrect, but you could be misled a little here if you're not paying attention to the whole context of the sentence. Adopting means to take something on, to make it your own. You could mistakenly connect adopting to hired. Prolonging, that's a word indicating some sort of expansion, so you could actually mistakenly connect that to the idea of something being the most blank. So again, you want to look at that big picture. So with that in mind, let's look at blank 1. Where does the big picture lead us for blank 1 here? Well, we want to look at, again, what the government wants to do. They want to bring the deer population back down. And they want to bring it back down to a manageable number. Well, if something is not manageable, and it needs to be brought back down to manageable, that means it's unmanageable. It's creating chaos. So disruptive should jump out at you. Again, though, it's easy to get fooled. The answer is C, disruptive, but what if you look at sparse and you say, hey, the population should go down, right? A population that's down is sparse. If you're not looking at the big picture, you make a false connection, you accidentally get tricked into the wrong answer. You don't want sparse. Similarly, tractable means changeable. And you could say, well, tractable, I saw the phrase this change. So, doesn't that mean that tractable is right? Well, not really. It doesn't make sense that just because the deer population is most able to change, it needs to go down. Disruptive creates more of an absolute need for the population to go down. So, again, don't get distracted. Always look at the big picture rather than the small stuff. Okay, so now we're going to look at a second example where the vocabulary is advanced. But you can still use the same principles I've already explained to you to solve this one as well. So, pause the video, put in your answers, and we'll talk about this. Right! So let's see how you did here. Okay, so if you've read the sentence, the Prime Minister has done something in relation toward his critics. So people are criticizing him. And that thing is ironic. There's an irony to this situation described in the first half of the sentence. And that irony will play into the second blank. Well, what is being held up as ironic? We don't quite know what the Prime Minister has done yet, but we know that he has critics. And these critics are publishing their criticism of him. So they're speaking very freely, right? And something in the second half of the sentence is ironic in light of the fact that there's that free speech. Well, what makes it ironic? Well, it says he has policies supporting free speech, free and open political expression, and that something in the way he behaves toward the people who criticize him is ironic in light of that. Well, if his policies support free speech, but his behavior is ironic in relation, what we're really seeing here is that he must be in some way not supporting free speech or opposing it. Now, here's the tricky part. This blank 1, these are low-frequency, harder vocabulary words. So instead of looking at what's going on in blank 1 right away, let's actually jump down to blank 2. Okay, so it says that his policies toward free speech support it, and they are at worst. Well, at their very worst, they're probably still supporting it. So minimally restrictive should jump out at you as a potentially correct answer, because if the worst he is minimally restrictive, that's consistent with him supporting free speech and it being ironic that he's doing something different than supporting it in the first part of the sentence. Okay, so minimally restrictive is likely right, but let's look at this word worst. This word worst was put in here to mislead you, because caustic means very mean. If somebody's caustic, they're being mean, they're being awful. If you're caustic toward free speech, you're limiting it. So it could be tempting to choose caustic, but that's the opposite of what we actually want. Draconian means limiting something in an unkind or unfair way. And again, draconian could easily connect to the word worst if you're not careful, but that's also incorrect. Okay, so let's look at what's going on then. Blank 2 is C. What is blank 1? Well, let's try to go with the easiest word first, the word you're most likely to know, commensurate. Commensurate means equal to or similar to. So if he's taking a commensurate public stance, he's criticizing his critics. Well, is that really the case, though? Would that be ironic? Well, no, that would be him saying, oh, I have free speech too. I can say what I want. You can say what I want. So there's no irony there. So commensurate, it might be almost tempting to select that because you'd say, well, he's pushing back against his critics. That must be ironic. But it's an equal pushing back and it's just speaking freely. So that doesn't quite work. What about obsequious? The next probably easiest word of these hard words. Well, if you're obsequious, you're very submissive and just letting people do what they want to do. Well, it wouldn't be ironic if he's being gentle toward his critics. That wouldn't be ironic in light of the fact that he supports free speech. That would just match it. So there's no irony there. Now, obsequious, you could accidentally match it to the idea that he supports free speech. But remember, there's an irony there. Don't be misled. Well, you get truculent by process of elimination. And truculent means angry and taking a fighting stance. And it's the most difficult word in this entire prompt. But if you pay attention to the words you're more likely to know, you can get to truculent by process of elimination. So there you have it. We've navigated two of these advanced double blank questions using the techniques that I taught you.